Hello, viewers, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Travel versus Video Conferencing, Bridging the Gap. I'm Peter Saltakis, your host today and one of today's presenters, and I'll be introducing our other presenter, Dan Rain, in just a moment, as well as our project team. The focus of this webinar is to share more with you about the TAMS Evaluator, a free online resource put out last week by the TAMS Technology Committee. Today, we'll dive deeper into what is the evaluator, why did we create it, how is it designed, things like its potential use cases, of course, where you can access it, and much more. But first, some quick housekeeping. This meeting is being recorded. It'll be posted to tamstravel.org in the next day. We'll also send it out to the people who've registered. Q&As. This is Zoom. You've probably done 1,000 of them by now in the last year, but just in case you forgot, Q&As can be submitted in the chat on the Zoom platform. And with that, we're going to introduce today's speakers. Here you can see on the slide. That's me on the left. Over here, of course, joining me. Hey, Dan, how's it going?
Good, thank you, Peter.
We have Dan Rain. Dan is the founder of Unlock Data, and he was the project's lead architect for this evaluator. He brings over 20 years of travel experience to our team. Not presenting today, but also joining us and also going to be a part of the Q&A towards the tail end. We have Crystal Schoenhals at EY, Dan Natuno at Amex GBT, Alex Tolmie at Marco Polo Institute, and Bruce Kopkin at DVI, now in Burse. And with that, let's take a look at the agenda. I know you all enthusiastically registered for this event, so you probably have a clue at least of what we're going to cover or the gist of things, but specifically, we're going to hear from our sponsor, Eureka Consulting, in just a moment. We'll talk about the objectives, overview, get into more of the nitty-gritty of the who, what, how, where, when, why, and then we'll look at the outcomes, the demo, and then, of course, some conclusions, takeaways, and the Q&A. But first, a word from our project sponsor, Luis.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much. Eureka Consulting is thrilled to sponsor this webinar today. We see the great work that's done across the entire technology committee of TAMS. I serve as the sponsor advisor for this committee. And for those of you who don't know Eureka, we are a 10-year consulting firm, global. We're headquartered in Paris. And we do projects across travel, payments, expense, and meetings, as well as many other indirect categories. Last year, we decided to add other indirect category services to our portfolio. And we also work very closely with a group called the Eureka Expert Network, which is volunteers that want to do pro bono work for buyers that need help, but don't necessarily have a consulting budget to keep everyone engaged. So the bottom line, we're here today because we care about education and we care about promoting innovation in the marketplace. So again, we're thrilled to sponsor this webinar today, and I'll turn it back to Peter. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Luis, and thank you, Eureka Consulting, for your support. So on to the next slide here. Let's talk about some of the objectives real quick. So to set the stage, our project team came together around January at a relatively tumultuous time in modern history. COVID-19 cases and death counts were at their all-time peaks in the last year, thanks to many of the December winter holidays. The world was holding its breath during the transition of the American presidency, and the first COVID-19 vaccines were just getting authorized for emergency deployment in a small handful of countries. So our first meeting, again in January, we really speculated that come April, now it's April 13th, we're presenting this, and of course we launched last week with the evaluator. We were speculating mass vaccination programs would be enjoying hopefully some early wins, at least in maybe some of the more highly developed countries. And that while business travel might not be roaring again, key decision makers, such as you all today on the call, at companies and organizations around the world would be asking themselves really three core questions. One, how do we logically decide in the coming months whether to continue conducting business online via video conferencing, or to start again sending some more people on the road again to meet in person, therefore authorizing more travel? Question two, was how do we inspire confidence in the act of traveling after the industry ground to a halt, and we've been at almost a year of relatively bare minimum business travel. And then 3, how do we balance factors like cost, safety, ROI per given activity, and then of course the rapidly changing world of things like COVID-19 regulations, testing, entry-exit requirements for international travel, in some countries even just crossing a state border or a province border if traveling within the confines of your country, as well as quarantine. So how do we balance all those factors? So we sat on these questions for a couple weeks, and I would say after much deliberation, we decided that we need to provide some sort of beacon or guidance, hopefully a free, publicly available tool that can also drive not just industry-wide recovery and confidence, but also hopefully provide some semblance of thought leadership that different organizations and thought leaders within their own organizations can then proliferate across their entities. So we didn't want to just say target travel managers, right? Travel managers are obviously a core focus group for this initiative, but we also wanted to create something that would be created and used by HR, legal, risk, facilities, a lot of other departments that have symbiotic relationships with corporate travel departments. So with that, at the end of it, how can we also target things like C-level executives? Because a lot of these in that realm, travel, HR, legal, risk, et cetera, work very closely together. But we also want to create something that would give C-level executives who have a final say on their entity's definition of permissibility, provide some guidance there as well for decision making. We can click to the next one there. So as Dan will soon explain and get into the workings, the evaluator is designed so that business activities wherein travel, as you can see in the upper right quadrant of that chart, is recommended when there's a high level of external permissibility, but also a high level of business justification. External permissibility, as you can probably imagine, is defined by factors that fall usually outside of the traveler's control. Maybe not necessarily the organization, but the traveler's control. Am I allowed to go? It's a mix of government regulations, but also corporate regulations set forth by different entities. Am I allowed at some degree of national, state, or local government to do this activity? Do I have the right documentation? Do I have the right testing? Do I have a proper vaccine or not? And then the classic travel management questions of, is this within budget or policy, et cetera. And then business justifications. This has a definition of, does this business activity have an ROI? Do the benefits outweigh the costs? Can the work be done on video conference at all? For example, if you're installing hospital equipment, you can't necessarily do that online. So yeah, maybe if you're a specialist or an engineer, you might have to get out there and go to that facility to set up the MRI machine. Or does being in person yield different results, say, than doing something over a video conference? For example, can international diplomacy be conducted via Zoom when sometimes you need to be able to feel the room out and issue a handshake or a bow or some sort of token or gesture towards the diplomatic party? So at the end of it, what we landed on was obviously business activities that score closer to the bottom left. You might want to jump on a video conference towards the upper right, travel, and then of course all the gray areas in between where you could perhaps teeter-totter on either end there. So I'm going to pass it to Dan. He's going to really explain how we did this. This was more of the why. So Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think that's a good job of framing the question that we posed ourselves, and how can we help the industry make better decisions about travel? And now, just a quick shout out. I mean, you'll get a chance to ask some questions of the rest of the group at the end, and I think if you wouldn't mind just putting those in the Q&A box, we'll get the other guys on video as well. But a pretty big and a tough question, multiple audiences, and recognizing that real mix between, on one hand, very objective kind of questions, am I allowed to go somewhere? And on the other hand, what's a very subjective matter, do I feel safe to go there? And that's the kind of the quandary we're trying to kind of or the balance we're trying to make through this, is guiding people through a decision-making process that enables an objectively good decision while taking taking into account the nuances of each business and different people's own risk appetites and some of those the individual challenges that people face. So I say it's a really good group. I must say, my first project in TAMS, and it's been a real a joy and a pleasure to work with the group that were volunteered for this thing. Our key kind of parameters as we're thinking through this was, we want to encourage travel where it's right, but also discourage travel where we think it might not be the best thing to do. So at one level, we want to make this whole experience very straightforward and easy. But on the other hand, we've got this idea of putting roadblocks or slowing people's decision-making process down to encourage them to really reflect on the decision at hand. So that's the kind of, we came up with this kind of 15-question max as we tested it through a few users as what we felt was acceptable through that process. And we choose your own adventure. I don't know whether that kind of works everywhere in the world, but that kind of concept that you work your way through a story to get to a conclusion, and that story would be different for multiple different endpoints or similar endpoints, but multiple ways of getting to that through that journey. But we want to make sure that we make it very clear and obvious to the travelers why they've got to that place. So as we were thinking through all those questions that need to be asked, we came up with these 6 here as subheadings, really, for the other questions kind of fall underneath these. And the first one, probably the most kind of critical, the most objective, is travel allowable. Am I allowed to go there? Very clear and obvious. They're the first questions that we handled. If the answer is no, then you're not going. Through to the more subjective questions, more nuanced. Is travel desirable? Do you feel comfortable going? Is it advisable? Does it make sense? Does it make sense for you and your business? Would we recommend this as being a good reason to travel for the trip reasons that you've laid out? So you want to go. It's advisable and it's allowable. But then, is it practical? Does it make sense? Can I get a flight? Does the venue that I'm going to be open and going to let me in? Is that office open where I want to go and meet someone? Just making sure those kind of very practical questions are thought through. And then these questions, which I think many of these would have been the questions you always ask. These aren't necessarily post-COVID related. Is it affordable? Is there a good ROI? And are we traveling in the most sustainable way? We really wanted to make sure we included elements of sustainability in that balance, these kind of balls that are juggling in the image there of how we were deciding. So I'll get into the detail of it. We came up with this, we called it a flow, which is this kind of, I'll show you very quickly the complexity we were wrangling through as we were trying to work out the different ways that the travelers might better answer and where they should go and a result of their questions. But the basic premise is, without going into this detail, we want to make it, there's different outputs depending on the questions that you answered. I'm going to jump onto the site now. Here, and I'll take you through a little bit of the logic as to some of these specific questions, just so you understand what we were thinking as we kind of work our way through this. So I guess the first and most important thing, really, we just want to make it really simple, really clear. It's obviously difficult to take into account everyone's circumstances from an organizational perspective and an individual perspective, but to try to make this clean, and it's a website you click. We haven't put a load of instructions in there. It's supposed to be clean and simple. So that's one of our, and it's actually fairly difficult getting something that complex down to something this 15 questions was probably the biggest challenge in all of this, just to keep saying no to more questions, because we can always add more. The challenge is, what do you take out? So really, really clean and simple. The flow's there to get you to an end result in as short a time as possible. So you see you've got these allowable questions here with this kind of the stop thing. If you click no to, are you allowed to go somewhere, or the government doesn't let you go, the questionnaire ends. That's it, you're done. We suggest you video conference. If you're not allowed to go, then let's stop things. And one of our principles behind this was we don't want to waste people's time. If you don't have to complete every question, then you get a score, and you scored. We did look at this, but you scored 20 out of 100. That's a no travel, but you spent 10 minutes filling out the form. That's going to frustrate people. So quickly as you can, if the answers are clear no, let's get you onto a no screen and go away and think about it a bit more, or do some or reconsider your plans. And we're not trying to. We're asking the traveller to identify whether they're allowed to go. We're not telling them that this location is a yes and this location is a no, but just to kind of do that very basic due diligence. You shouldn't really be completing this questionnaire if you haven't thought about some of those things. So we've got a number of these yes, no questions through the allowable part. But recognizing then we don't like I don't knows, because you think if you're not sure, you should really go and find out. That was our principle. But we kind of took it in a couple of different ways. If you answer I don't know to some of these middle questions, so you kind of get through that allowable piece, but now then do you feel safe part, it becomes like a cumulative thing. If you answer too many I'm not sures or too many I don't knows, we throw you out at that point. So, you know, here we go, you said I'm not sure to 2 or more in this section, do some research and try again. So it's just that kind of sense of, we don't want people to put an I don't know all the way through the questions and then getting to the end and saying, yes, I can travel, when in actual fact, you don't know the answer. But equally recognizing sometimes don't know is a good answer. You know, is that venue cleared to travel? How do you find out? You know, maybe we'll let you through that hurdle, but if it's repeated. So that's some of the thinking behind the I don't know parts. So we're discouraging it. If we think it's a critical question, then you'll get booted to a virtual. If it's a kind of, there's probably some legitimacy in not knowing, then it's kind of a weighted, if you don't know too many, then you're going to go and say, do some research. It's the kind of way out of that. Moving through then, so then this is where the kind of branch and logic becomes most obvious. So what's the primary purpose of your trip? And obviously the kind of the logic completely departs at this point. So if I'm going for an external meeting, asking around whether I've combined some trips, yes or no. Yes, I've considered combined trips, but it's not feasible, or no, I've not considered it. If you said no, you're not considered it, it says please go and consider. And then this was took a lot of going through different testers to kind of get some different feedback. There's clearly a lot of things we could put in there for your reason for your travel. What we were trying to get to is not necessarily a comprehensive list, but you know, if you put L&D, learning and development, that's going to take you down another path to to answer some specific questions around that. But also recognizing that we don't know everyone's circumstance. So I'll just refresh and start again on this one. But you'll notice as I click through that you can't click yes to everything. There's a few questions in there that throw you out. If you click yes to, then you get you've not read the question properly. I'll just go to that internal, external again. There's some I choose not to answer pieces, like on the vaccination. We just figured that that was an allowable response, but there's a roadblock. So if I click other here, so this is my trip reasons question. What's the purpose of your external travel? If you click I don't know, this is a good example. And there's a few places where this trips up, where we just put a road hump in there to say that if the trip list, you know, we thought that these were the best reasons why you need a physical meeting. So you know there's some creativity involved, or there's been a long time in the meeting without a meeting, or it's sales for meeting a supplier or a customer face to face. Those kind of good reasons, but recognizing we don't know everyone's business, so we don't say that you're not allowed to travel if it's not one of those reasons. But we just put this kind of roadblock in here. Yeah, are you sure? And I think this thinking we've tried to is probably we've spoken to throughout the questionnaire. Really, is that idea that. With this data, we're not saying anyone can or can't travel, clearly. It's a recommendation. But we just think we want to help decision making. And it's a bit like, I'm sure you got this in the US, you do your tax return and you get to the end and it's like, no, are you really sure you haven't lied or something? You know, you get that kind of final box tick, everything's true. And, you know, everyone pauses for a minute then, right? And thinks, have I done everything right? You know, I don't want to go to jail kind of, you know, it's that, and I think we're just trying to get that mentality that someone's looking. There's some accountability. You have to physically assent to, yes, I think this is important. The trip reason in this instance could be considered good for virtual, but you're going to proceed anyway. And that's the kind of point we're trying to get to, is that throughout decision-making process, we're just asking you to consider, reconsider, think again. Is this definitely right? And that's our kind of approach, really. We're not trying to get people to a no unnecessarily. We're just trying to get people to think. So, and this is another good example, the ROI question. We've struggled with travel ROI forever, and people have always traveled despite the fact that ROI is difficult to identify. But then it's just got another kind of road hump in there to make sure, you know, have you really thought about this? You know, your business thinks it's a good idea. You know, that kind of final thinking towards the end. And we got some sustainability. Sustainability, we wanted to include it, recognizing it's a challenge of different companies in different places. So we've got a question in here around your company's carbon budget. Do you have one? If you don't, are you going to be mindful? And even then, if you're not sure, we get to another kind of, please make sure you consider the environment. And all in all, you complete the questions. There's a maximum of 15 if you answer the longest route. And it could be 1 if you answer no to one of the early questions. So we feel like it's a good use of time to get to encourage that thinking and get to this point at the end where we're hopefully people are traveling. We know how important it is, and for good business. So before I hand back, I just want to show you the initial results. We've had this in play for a week, I guess, for soft launch last week. About 1,000 people have completed it from beginning to end. We've got to an answer. And this is what the breakdown's looking like at the moment, where 26% of the respondents got to a yes, I am clear to travel. So they navigated those 15 questions and got to a yes. Oh, sorry. And then of the remainder, so the 3/4 remainder is roughly 50-50 split, where slightly more, the answer was go and do some more research. So you've answered I don't know to some questions in there. So maybe travel is right, you just need to do some more research, or some kind of answer that says virtual is most appropriate, or definitely virtual's the right thing to do. So there's a number of results that kind of included within this, but I think it makes sense for us to report on this again in the future. It's kind of interesting as more and more people complete this, what that split looks like. But it kind of feels like not a bad place to be in for the first 1,000 people who have completed it, bearing in mind most of those people will be testing. So that's, we've got questions going to come in a moment. This is the URL, tamstravel.org/evaluator. Spot wrong, ignore that. And that's my fault. And it's, I think the link will also be in the comments and chat in a moment. So that's kind of where we got to. It's an exciting place, really good project, fantastic to be involved. And I think Peter's going to host the Q&A part.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Dan. So that's tamstravel.org/evaluator. Disregard the typo. No problem. We'll have the link out as well to everyone with the recording, and it's obviously posted online for you to get to right now. So Dan, if you can click ahead to the next slide there for the Q&A, let's open up our panelists. Let's put our panelists, the project team, all on camera. So say hi, everybody. They're coming back. Here we are. Welcome back. And we have some pretty great audience participation. So I'm going to rattle these off, and then whoever wants to grab it first, feel free, and I'll also try to delegate where appropriate. So first question here. Let's talk about how many questions did we start off with before we whittled it down to this final product? What was that thought process, and what didn't necessarily make the cut? Anyone want to take that one?
Do that? Bruce is on mute. I can hear him talking.
I'm trying to remember. It was actually quite a large number, and we did a couple of test cases with a few different companies, and some of the initial feedback was it was a little bit long. So we then brought it back together again and got this response that somewhere in that, a dozen to 15 questions was really about the most people would get to before they got frustrated with the program. So we worked as a team here to get it down to that level, which is where we ended up.
Yeah, that's about right, Dan. I think honestly, the laundry list was about 50, but then to tie them in terms of the logic started proving difficult. And then we did that user case focus group, and it was I don't want to answer more than X number, and so we tried to whittle it down.
Yeah. I think that's probably the biggest challenge throughout this has been that whittling down thing. I think we're all coming from different experiences, different parts of the world, and that's why this project team I think is particularly successful with your own nuances that you're trying to bring. And I think the that question list is easy to get big and very hard to get down, and I think that's probably where a huge amount of our time ended up getting spent bringing that down.
Thank you all. On to the next question. So I'm going to try this Q&A thing here on the Zoom, answer live. So we have a question here from Rob. Is this customizable at the company level? Please explain. Maybe Dan, you want to take that one?
Yeah, maybe you can.
Yeah, so we built it not to be. So that's a tough answer in the first instance. We want try and use it, I guess would be our suggestion. It's free. And we're a small team. Saying that, if you do want to look at a customized version, then contact the TAMS guys, and we're looking at some options around that. So we're not ruling it out. But I think in the first instance, we'd say give it a try. If it's one question or two questions you don't like, could your travelers get over that hurdle and use it? We want to get it used. That's our and so yeah, it's not impossible, but have a go.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So just to wrap that up with the bow, I'll say any inquiries, we have an FAQ on the website as well. So if you wish to reach out to us about potential one-off customizations, you can reach us at technology@tamstravel.org. Again, that's technology@tamstravel.org, and that information is also on the site's FAQ. All righty, couple more here. Let's talk about, can it be embedded into online booking tools? We have a question here from Claire. Can it be embedded into online booking tools?
I think there's a couple of options there. I think for the non-customized version, you could put the link to the TAMS site. So you saw the URL there. There's no reason why that couldn't be in your traveler flow as they go through their booking experience. If you wanted to put a link in there out to that site before proceeding. At the moment, we definitely could see a use case where people would want to kind of use it as an authorization tool, but we could do that potentially. But I thought in the offset was to try and link into everyone's tool and those kind of things. It starts getting complex. We want to keep it. We want to go live with something soon and get it used and get people thinking. So I guess it's more of a thought provocation tool, decision matrix tool, as opposed to an authorization tool, is where it stands today.
Thank you. We have time for about 2 more questions before we wrap up. Future iterations of the tool. So this is out. This is live. This launched last week. Is there going to be a retrospect in the next month, 3 months, 6 months, next year? Are you going to be soliciting feedback and then building that into a next version? How is that going to work?
So I'll take this. I think we've been talking about it, right, with the team, our bandwidth, and this tool evaluator could be iterative for a while, right? So I think I think we welcome feedback. Absolutely, I think that'll help in a version 2 build. But we have to be mindful of, and going back to our objective, right? Keep it simple, right? And we're going to get a lot of probably customization questions in that point. So I think the one-on-one calls might prove more helpful in that scenario. But version 2 I think is feasible. Maybe a summer release, but I think it'll continue to grow and change. So we'll have to figure out how far out that goes.
Thank you, Crystal. 2 more minutes, maybe 1 more question. Let's see here. We have another one here from Rob, actually. Thank you, Rob, for all the questions. These are great. Will the resources to answer the questions be added to the tool? I am referring to the questions are more regulatory and less subjective, such as, can you travel to X location? Any takers for Rob's question?
Yeah, I think we did talk about that through there, of having some links to different federal and industry guidelines as to what's happening. Those things are changing so often with CDC and other federal and government regulations. To keep that up was basically just put some links in there to get that done would probably be the best way to do that.
Yeah, there's a couple of links in. If you get to the I don't knows, there's we put some IATA links and some other third-party free resources in there. Obviously we're trying not to say yes or no to those questions, but letting other people do that yes or no. Right. So we put those in there. Interested in feedback as to whether they're the right ones. If there's anything else that you think we should put on those links, it's obviously pretty easy for us to add. So if there's other feedback on that, it'd be great to take that as well.
Yep.
Thank you all. And I'll even take this last one here just so we can end on time. But anonymous, are there any reporting options showing who used it and traveled anyway or didn't? The answer to that is no, not yet today. But of course, if you wish to explore some semblance of a custom project in the future, again, that in theory could exist, but as it stands today, on tamstravel.org/evaluator. That answer is no, not yet. And with that, I believe that is a wrap. So we will say, first and foremost, thank you all for attending. The recording will be posted in the next day on tamstravel.org. We'll also be sending out a survey, so please just be sure to give us a positive review. Of course, we're also open to your critique and your feedback on areas for improvement, in addition to ways that we can continually improve this free tool for the broader industry's use. So thank you very much. tamstravel.org/evaluator. Big shout out to the project team here, as well as to our folks behind the scenes at TAMS who've been able to make this possible, and of course, our sponsor. So until then, safe travels, stay safe, take care. Bye, everybody. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
So.